Never have enough time to play it all. You know everybody wants to walk in someone else's shoes. Everyone's forgot who they are. Such a crime to waste his time.
Hey guys, welcome back to Otter Creek and Rio Grande. And I thought I would start with a view of Maroon Creek that maybe we haven't really looked at yet, and watch the 462 go by with a couple 3-passenger cars. So we're gonna start right where we left off from the previous video and kind of discuss, what I'm gonna do with a few of the issues that I'm facing concerning the standard gauge and the narrow gauge and what I'm trying to accomplish there, and maybe what some solutions are. As mentioned in the previous update, I have gone in and lopped off 2 inches of each of these risers here for held gate. And so it's currently standing right at 59 inches. And I'm thinking that works pretty good. I think I could come down another 1/2 inch, maybe more if I needed to. But I have to keep in mind that as this track, goes off underneath the plywood there, that there's a certain amount of clearance that I need to maintain for a standard gauge equipment. So for the viewers who might not be familiar with narrow gauge equipment versus standard gauge equipment, I've got this particular locomotive, a 280 consolidated, which is a standard gauge locomotive with a standard gauge, I think this is a 40-foot box car on the back of it. And then right here, we have a narrow gauge 30-foot box car. So they're the same scale, 1 inch equals 87 inches. But the actual prototype for the narrow gauge, their equipment was just built much smaller. So you can see the difference there. If I actually put this, on the same track, I don't know if I can rail it or not by hand, but you can see there just the difference in size of equipment. So I need about 3 inches of clearance for the standard gauge. I do have a standard gauge track gauge somewhere that I can make use of, but I'm thinking that 3 inches should get it for, if for whatever strange reason, way down here on this end, if I ever wanted to run a modern piece of equipment up underneath there for whatever reason, 3 inches is the new era standards height that you can get away with. No more than 3 inches of clearance for today's modern equipment. So what am I going to do here? And for every decision that you make when you're building a model railroad, it's going to affect your next decision. And so depending on what decision you make first, you can kind of rule out decisions you would have made at a later date about something else. So you have to be kind of careful about what do I do first and what do I make permanent first. And in this particular instance, I've got to make this area right in here. It's got to be the first decision I make, because everything else that I do after that is going to be depending on what I do here with the dual gauge. So I mentioned in the last video that I wanted to be able to do something with standard gauge, having a place to go. And so here's my solution. I'm going to build a dual gauge turnout that turns the narrow gauge out into this track and then continues with the dual gauge on through. I think it's just going to have to be a tunnel portal. And then once I get 6 or 8 inches into the tunnel portal, then I will split the standard gauge off to the left. And then the standard gauge can go to the outside of the spline, and I can sneak it, back around this corner, keeping, the radius as broad as I can get away with. And then right here, because this will all be scenic somehow, some way, I can put my hand turntable right in here. And since this will all be plywood and pretty much at the same height, give or take 3 inches below the plywood here, then I can have two tracks eventually. I'll throw in another standard gauge turnout somewhere up underneath there. I can build it all on the workbench out in the shop and then set it right in here. So I've got a hidden staging yard just for the standard gauge, just to have some place to bring a standard gauge train, so I can have a little variety of equipment for the standard gauge. And that's all I really want. I think it was John Allen who said, if you model both narrow gauge and standard gauge, one or the other is going to suffer. The standard gauge is going to suffer on my railroad for sure, but I do want some because I do like the equipment. I think it's a good thing to have a little bit of both, just because it did exist at the same time and in the same place. Now back to this, since decisions have been made, it's just a matter of building for sure these two turnouts, the two dual gauge turnouts are going to work, one to split off the narrow gauge this way and the other one to split off the standard gauge to the left there. I need to get those built, and then once those are built, the next step is to figure out the plywood for the standard gauge and what's going on there. I'd like to have all of that completed and set in place before I do anything up here in Hell Gate. The only thing I might do in Hell Gate, prior to, is get a real good feel of where the yard tracks are going to be and where the turnouts are going to be, because tortoise motors are going to sit beneath there, and they're going to sit more than 3 inches beneath, or right at 3 inches. So that's something I'm going to have to consider with where this spline goes, is I'm going to have to thread through any tortoises in this area. So, again, it's all about which comes first, the chicken or the egg, and you have to make sure that you know what you're doing before you do it, because you can certainly work yourself into a corner you can't get out of. But I think it does start with making sure that I've got those two turnouts built, and then figuring out where the tortoises are going to go on this end. That end shouldn't be a problem. This end might be. And it could be such a thing that I have to offset them no matter what I do. I might not be able to take this track through there without a tortoise being in the way. So, all things that have to be considered and worked out before you go full scale. Well, the two dual gauge turnouts that I've just built are ready to be tested. And now they're in 180 degree opposite direction of the way they'll actually be on the railroad, which is immaterial. But what I thought was that since I'm going to test these anyway, I also ought to think about testing some radii for the standard gauge, just to kind of make sure that I know I'm not going to work myself into any problems because I chose a radius that was too tight. And I've got a couple different subjects here, really just one as far as standard gauge goes. I've got one subject. I think it will be the model that will cause me the most problems as far as track radius goes. So this is a K59 standard gauge 482, and I presume that similar to a K27 that has 27,000 pounds of tractive effort, this has 59,000 pounds of tractive effort. So we're gonna run it through the turnouts here, and we're gonna see how it handles a 22-inch radius curve, and then on this end, right in through here, that last piece, I've introduced 18 inches of radius because I want to see, how tight can this thing go, primarily because at some point I'm going to have to think about what I'm going to do in Cloud City, and I would like to keep that bench work at about 52 inches wide. I could go as wide as 54. We're just going to have to see. So my initial test here will kind of help me with firming up my track plan for that particular area on the railroad. Now the track is actually pretty terrible. I didn't go to any great lengths to try and make this smooth and level. This area over here, I've got two pieces of plywood kind of held together with a small clamp over there. They're at two different elevations, and so I expect there to be some issues there. And my wiring to the Tech 2, it's horrendous. So just trying to get a feel for what will work and what maybe absolutely won't work. So here we go. I don't have the frogs lit up, so yeah. Let me make sure it's not shorting, I don't think. Let's see if we can go in reverse now. Okay, that proves some things to me. It proves that this particular locomotive right here can handle an 18-inch radius. So, the 22-inch radius that I have through here is absolutely doable. And let's take it one time through the diverging route off of the dual gauge onto the single gauge there, the standard gauge. See how that works. Now, again, my frogs are dead, so I don't know how that's going to work. So the only thing to do now is go ahead and test the narrow gauge portion of these dual gauge turnouts. This is the Sunset Models K28, number 473. And that K59 is 11 inches long. This is only 8.5 inches long. And I don't expect it to handle the the dead frogs quite as well. I guess we'll just have to see. If I have to run it through extremely fast, that's what I'll do. I'm mostly making sure that there's no derailments going through. Yeah, that's all dead frog type stuff there. We'll come back through and maybe hit it a little faster. Yeah, no derailments. That's the primary thing I'm looking for. Now I just need to come through the diverging route. I can't go through the diverging route for the standard gauge there because there's no mechanism for that to happen unless the throw out bar is thrown to go that way. Then I'm kind of screwed, but it's not supposed to go that way. So everything's not always rainbows and unicorns here at the Otter Creek and Rio Grande. Right here, this is the toad, and I need to come in here. What's going on is the wheel flange is picking this right here. It doesn't do it every time, but it does it enough the time that I darn sure wouldn't want to deal with this in a permanent location on the railroad. So I'm going to come in here with some files and give myself just a little bit more room in between the stock rail and the toad there. All right, that's 10 or 15 times through. I just needed a little bit of filing. Everything seems to be working well now. So I guess I've learned a few things. And with that knowledge, now I can go ahead and create the plywood sub-road bed for what will be the standard gauge on the underneath side of Hell Gate. I know that I can get away with 18 inches if I absolutely have to, but I think I'm going to see what 24 inches look like through there, and I think that will be better because I think I've got room in that corner that I'm not going to be limited to 18 inches like I will be in Cloud City when it comes time to build that. I'm looking forward to the day that comes when I can put DCC and sound in my K28. I'm looking forward to that. And of course, that's a whole nother project there. That's a long way down the road. Eventually I will do some DCC and sound on my own. I've got 3 other subjects that are non-painted brass standard gauge that they're all rescue locomotives. Eventually I'll get around to trying to make some of them go. But in the meantime, it's all about track work and wiring. A little in progress here. So back over here in this corner, I've got the piece of foam there that goes into the time saver. And I've got that worked out to where I'm just nearly positive that's exactly where I want that particular turnout to be. And there'll be a short piece of dual gauge track here into this turnout. And then this will be spline, which is the narrow gauge. And so what I need now is a right-hand turnout here, standard gauge, that I can create my passing siding in here, because I want 2 pieces of track so that I can run around. And it's all looking like it's gonna work. I would say the one issue that I'm gonna have is, I don't know if you lay over the top of this hell gate, and if I'm gonna have any trackage going that way up to maybe a foot from the wall in, going that way on top of the green foam, then my turnouts for that yard are definitely gonna be in there. So I'm probably gonna have to not use tortoises. I'm probably gonna use I think it's train control concepts. If I've got that wrong, I'll fix it in the lettering on the bottom side of the screen here somewhere. But those switch motors are about 1 inch thick, really low profile, should work in there just fine. I would say worst case scenario, if that doesn't fix any clearance problems that might occur in here, I would have the option of raising Hellgate up again from the decision that I just made to bring it down 2 inches. So I think the next step is getting a right-hand turnout and a left-hand turnout standard gauge made, and then figuring out exactly in here, once I get that put in, what does the plywood look like? Because at some point it's going to need to be cut so that I can bring my spline in here and then continue with the plywood. All of this is going to be on plywood, and this chunk of plywood here is going to get used for all of that. I just got to figure out how wide it needs to be, because I think I've got, give or take, 8 feet in both directions. So we'll see what happens next. Well, I've got a pretty good handle on what it is I'm gonna do. I've got all of the turnouts created, and I did something a little different here than what I originally planned on doing. Once I kind of took a look at that, I realized that a a left-hand turnout was actually going to be working against me, and I would have ended up with like 2 S-curves going through those turnouts, which is never a good idea. So I created this turnout, which, you know, is built in the dual gauge fixture. And one of the things you can do is you can completely split out the narrow gauge from the standard gauge and do it in such a way that there are no moving points. Claude suggested this or mentioned it on Back on Track this last Saturday morning, and I hadn't really thought about it until he mentioned it, but you can see right here that the narrow gauge just starts to take a radius, and so your flange goes through this toad right there and just splits off with no moving point. And then right here, your standard gauge just keeps on trucking right straight through, and the flange goes on the other side of the toad, and you know there's no moving parts there. So that worked out pretty good. Now I'm at a point where I don't think I can do much more until I get, you know, for sure cork. I've got a bunch of scrap cork. I might be able to cork all of this, you know, with some scrap, because I've got more than that, but I don't know that I want to. But I need to solder the track and do some other things to kind of make sure that my radii is working, and it's going to. There's not going to be any problems there. I've got too much plywood kind of kicking out on this end. You can see where that piece of masonite right there is. That's where my turntable is going to need to go. So it's not going to be as much trackage as I thought there was going to be, but there's going to be enough. But what I need to do is splice. You know, I've got 3 chunks of wood here. I need to splice them together and then figure out the splice over here for the foam, because that's going to be, you know, a little thing to kind of have to solve there, because you got 1 inch going to 1/2 inch, and it's not going to be any big deal, just kind of figuring it all out. But I don't think there's much else I can do this weekend. I've got some cork ordered. I may or may not use some scraps or not. I don't know. But I want to get this put in kind of where it's going to go into the actual layout before I lay any track, just because I want to make sure I know exactly where it's going and how it's going to fit, because that's definitely going to impact scenery. And you know, I've got a couple of different ideas through here, because, you know, the foam is all going to be scenery, and then somewhere through here will be a tunnel portal or something. If I could get away without a tunnel portal, I would. I'm just going to have to look at it. But, you know, these turnouts might need to move a little bit further forward. None of that is really, well, none of the track work is set in stone, but I want to get it put up on the benchwork before I do anything else, just so I'll feel comfortable with how it's all gonna work. So that's this video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time on Otter Creek and Rio Grande.